So that's pretty much my theory in a nutshell. Obviously, there's probably a lot more that goes into that I'm not touching on right now, but it's the theory of, you know, possible this is all tied together. It's possible that Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. The remains are there now. They're going to be excavated over the next few years and probably confirm this is the actual Ark or the remnants of the Ark. And then it's possible that Noah and his family went over to this location where Mount Ararat, Gobekli Tepe is, and possibly built that altar to sacrifice the animals to God and you know, encapsulate the message of the story of the flood for future generations to find and read about and understand that this is what happened and this is the oldest, documentation we have that predates all the other flood stories throughout history, which would, prove that the biblical one in Genesis is the truest one, the oldest one, and the one that actually happened. All right, everybody, back with another one. Welcome to 2026. We are officially in the new year. This is the first official podcast of the new year. The last one we had, I think it aired the first or second day of the new year, but it was actually just a 2025 recap. So if you haven't seen that episode, feel free to go back and take a look at it. It just kind of highlights some of the um, interesting moments in the podcast for the last year of 2025. We just went through some, 5 minute or so clips of several episodes there, ranging from some interesting topics that we discussed, whether it was political, health, topical news items, and also factored in some clips from the interviews that I've had with our guest, Anthony Volpe, and packaged it all in there in a nice 2025 recap episode going over, just some highlights from the previous year's podcast episode. So if you haven't tuned into the podcast yet and you're new and this is your first time, and you want to get a little recap as to, what the podcast is about so far, feel free to go check out the last episode of the 2025 year-end recap. It's really a good way to get a glimpse into, what's going on in this podcast over the last year and see if it is something that interests you, if the type of topics that we talk about are stuff that you're interested in. Some of them are a little weird and unique and deep dives into, different things, whether it's historical stuff or biblical stuff. And if that's, your cup of tea, definitely feel free to, like and subscribe to the channel so you can stay in, touch and find out more about the content that we have coming out in the future. Especially like today's episode, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Check out the recap episode. I think it has a lot of great clips. Obviously, we've done so many episodes over the last year. We hit our 100 episode mark in 2025, and this is now episode, I think, 106. So we are already over 100 episodes into the podcast. And, we're not going to be able to fit all of that into the recap, but we did the best we could to, take some really interesting highlights and mix it up and do different types of topics and stuff and package it all in there in one episode. So definitely check that out. I think it's a good scope of what the podcast is about in a nutshell. We're going to talk today about a continuation of the whole Noah's Ark thing with the discovery at Mount Ararat and tie that into another discovery that archaeologists found a while back and make my point as to my theory as to what I believe what that is, what the connections are, and it's probably going to come out over the next 5 to 10 years that this is true or some element of it is true, and we'll do more on this in the future because I think it expands to much greater things, globally, historically, geologically, archaeologically, so we'll definitely talk more about this topic in the future, and I think it could lead to some interesting discussions on the internet. I'd love to get some, you know, people in the archaeological field, the biblical field, the scientific community on the podcast to discuss some of these theories and things that we're going to talk about here today and other episodes in the future or in the past that we've done. So, as we continue to pursue more guests for future episodes for this year 26, definitely, put in the comments, message me, whatever way you want to get the information to me. let me know what type of guests you think might be good for the channel to interview, especially in regards to this topic that we're going to talk about today, this theory, and people who are credible, people who actually do this for a living, who are way more intelligent in this area than me. That would really be great to interview them and bounce the ideas off them and see if any of these theories check out, historically or archaeologically or whatever. But let me know, what type of guests, if you know or are familiar with anybody's work online that is in these fields that relate to the topic that we're going to talk about today. Let me know. Put it in the comments. Put it in a private message to me, because I'd like to, see if we could book certain people to interview on the podcast this year. Our goal is to definitely get many more guests on the channel as the channel continues to grow, which it's doing steadily right now. Thank you to you. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the follows and, all the engagement and whatever. I appreciate all that stuff. I'm not super into social media, and there's a reason for that, which I've talked about in the past and we'll talk about more in the future. But I do appreciate the subtle things that we do partake in social media, with social media, in terms of, engagement. Because I think that's the last thing left in this digital world where it's still human. And, you know, liking, subscribing, commenting, those are all things that still allow us to keep the human element in this digital world where we can still talk to each other, still have conversations to some degree, even though it's not in person, which I think is always the best. So I am appreciative of that stuff. And it helps the channel grow. If you like the content, if you like what we're doing here, which hopefully is different than what many other people are doing, because we don't want to have a, copycat podcast. Definitely continue to, subscribe and engage because it will allow us to continue to grow as a channel and be able to provide more content for you. But obviously you have to do that on your own. I say it just as a reminder because, the data shows that, if you remind people often, they're more likely to do it. So I do it because that's the game that we play in this podcasting world. But, I prefer that to not pressure people into doing things and just, if you find a value in this, if it interests you, subscribe because then I can continue to provide content to you and you'll see it. But if not, that's fine too. No pressure. So we're going to talk about all this stuff. I did make another upgrade to the podcast, which hopefully you're noticing by now because I'm not sure if I have all the settings correct. But we have upgraded some minor things. We resituated the podcast studio layout a little bit. If you notice, the microphone's on this side now. We flipped it. We have some other stuff in the background now, just to add a little bit more to it. So it's not just a person sitting in front of a backdrop, which, yes, the brick is a backdrop, but I just like the black brick. I think that's, cool looking with the white mortar in between. So that was just a style. We'll probably change the backdrop over time to give it a little bit more depth and a little bit more make it a little more interesting here. But we did change a few things. But the most important thing we upgraded was the camera. We got a better quality camera to hopefully make the videos more watchable. Because even though I think for the most part, for me at least, as a also a spectator, a viewer, an audience member of other people's podcasts, the quality of everything doesn't matter as much as the content, but the quality does still matter. If something is unwatchable or the quality is very poor, where it looks like a very old, outdated technology, it can be kind of hard to, you know, uh, not let that interfere with the content as well, with you watching it and be able to enjoy it as much. We're doing our best here to, slowly improve the podcast as we continue to grow and expand. And one of the things I wanted to do to make it more watchable for you is to get a better quality camera. So the one that we have now is recording. It should be, if I have all the settings right, recording in 4K. So if you have a 4K option on your, whatever phone, computer, YouTube, I think has it for everybody. If you do have that option or whatever platform you're streaming on and you want to watch it in the best quality, you should be able to switch over to 4K now, and the quality should be much better. So hopefully this will help make the podcast more watchable for people that are watching it on video format instead of just audio. But we're going to get into the topic in just a moment. I did want to promote, while we have the chance, the book, children's book, Little Boy Full of Love. This is my children's book. I wrote this book for my son. It's a real published book. This is an actual book that's me on the back. It has an ISBN number. That's the publisher right there. And it's a real book that is actually published and printed for distribution, you know, in all the major markets. It is in, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Walmart, Indigo, which I think spans both America and Canada, and several other platforms, bookshop.org, things like that. So if you have any interest in getting a children's book, that's a really good, wholesome book, tells really nice messages and life lessons that are sort of universal. You can get the book on any of those platforms. The book's also actually sold in a good amount of bookstores throughout the country as well. We had the opportunity of partnering with many bookstores throughout the country. I think we're in 20 states right now, in actual physical bookstores in 20 states. So it is in at least a couple of bookstores in multiple states across the country. If you just so happen to have the book, see it or find out about it being at a bookstore that is near you and you want to go pick up a copy at the physical location, we always recommend that because I like partnering with real bookstores and having it on the shelves and, helping small businesses. So if you find out it's at a local bookstore and you want to get it from them, I recommend that instead because we like, helping our local businesses. But if it's not in a bookstore near you, get it online. Everything has ended now for the sales and everything with the holidays, with Christmas being over, but there might still be some sales going on those platforms. So if you do want to get some after Christmas gifts for people, or just buy it for yourself, for your child, with the Christmas money that you got from family and friends, it's a relatively inexpensive book. It's a really great wholesome book, and if the book continues to do well, we're probably gonna make another one and might even build it into a series of books that are really nice books for, parents who want to teach their children good life lessons to be able to read to them. So the book, definitely get it on all the major platforms if you're interested in that or you want to gift it to somebody who has a kid. But today we're going to talk about the combination of the Noah's Ark discovery and the Gobekli Tepe, I think that is how you pronounce it, conspiracy and discovery that has been floating around online for quite a while. I've seen a lot of channels do the conspiracy videos about that and how it's probably aliens, some ancient civilization, all this stuff. And there's like a lot of weird mystery around things. And I think when we don't know something, it's the unknown that makes us fill in the gaps. And then we just start creating this stuff because humans have like a way of wanting to tell story and having an interest and love for story because our entire existence is story, right? If you look at the Bible, look at all the stories in the Bible from Adam and Eve, the beginning, the first two people, to current times at that time of biblical life, post Jesus's life and death and resurrection, and then even into the future of Revelation, which hasn't even come yet. Story has always been a big part of our human existence. So I think sometimes we like to fill in the gaps, and sometimes I think the simpler, more plausible thing is the thing that actually is the truth. And we like to go off on these like mind tangents, thinking that it's this, deeper thing. It has to be more complicated. It has to be more crazy. And as I get older, I find that most things in life are a lot more simple than they actually appear. And we almost don't want to believe it because of the simplicity. For some reason, it's more believable if it's more complicated. And I think we have a way of overcomplicating things sometimes. So I think a lot of the conspiracies are interesting in theory. And again, my thing today is just a theory as well. But I base it off of, biblical and, God and, just sort of connecting those dots as well as tying it into archaeologically what we've found, not just what we believe, but what we actually have physically found, and make my own assumptions on that. I mean, I could be wrong, and don't let this you know theory be the next conspiracy online. Don't let it be the next thing that people are bouncing around as though it's fact because I it's just a guess. It's just a theory that I sort of put the pieces to the puzzle together and vaguely believe myself. I'm not even totally sold on it. I'm just connecting the dots and thinking, maybe this is a possibility. So we'll jump into that now. I want to take a look at some stuff, but my theory essentially is that the Gobekli Tepe archaeological find, which we're going to take a look at, is in relation to Noah's Ark and that whole situation. And that's just my theory because of, looking at everything as a whole big picture and thinking, well, maybe this is a possibility. But we're going to take a look real quick at what the Gobekli Tepe thing is, and then we're going to go into my theory and connecting as to how it relates. So it's really quite um, interesting, the whole Gobekli Tepe find. But this is an archaeological site that was discovered in Turkey, essentially. They label it as prehistoric archaeological site in southeastern Turkey, uh, dated to pre-pottery Neolithic period 9500 to 8000 BC, which they changed it. When I was growing up, it used to just be BC. It became BCE, which I think is before current era. And, BC used to be before Christ because we changed the way our calendar and everything was, time and everything based around the pre-existence of Christ on earth and then the birth of Christ. And so the world was broken up from BC to AD, which we all remember growing up if you grew up as a millennial or older, and they changed it to BCE. So that's just a little, something for the younger people, the Gen Zs who might not know because maybe their whole life they grew up with the BCE thing, but that's a relatively newer thing. I think in the last like 10 to 20 years, they're saying 9,500 to 8,000 years BC, which would be another 20, 25 years from now on top of that. So over 10,000 years ago, possibly this archaeological find is from. It is one of the oldest known monumental structures by humans, predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the pyramids by even more. It challenges traditional views of human development as it were constructed by hunter-gatherers before the advent of agriculture, pottery, and metal tools. The site consists of at least 20 circular or oval enclosures, 10 to 30 meters in diameter, each containing up to 12 massive T-shaped limestone pillars up to 5.5 meters tall, weighing 10 to 20 tons, arranged in rings around two central taller pillars. These were quarried nearby and erected with remarkable engineering skill. So, a couple notes from that just off the bat. And I'm gonna relate all this, but I'm gonna tie in my theories as I go. So the Bible, specifically in Genesis, around the Noah story, actually explains that agriculture already existed and that people were already doing it. So at that time, it's possible that, history, our information of history with carbon dating and everything, we might be off with stuff, but apparently people have already been doing this. And it makes sense because if you look back at Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, there were already plants. God provided all that stuff for them. They already had apples. Obviously, if the apples, were taken off the tree and a seed was planted from the apple in the ground, it probably would have sprouted a new thing. And from that very moment, gardening was invented all the way back with Adam and Eve's time. Now, we don't know how long they were in the garden. We don't know how long, what they did. Were they messing around with the stuff, or was it just always provided for them? Because at that time, it was pre-fall, so there probably was no need for any planting or gardening or but it definitely did happen around that time because after the fall, Adam and Eve had to start working on the land as part of the curse. So it's possible that agriculture and farming and all that stuff, gardening, whatever, had existed literally since the beginning with Adam and Eve. But archaeologists and scientific people tend to always say, um, everybody was hunter before they got into farming and stuff, and we used to like be cavemen and use spears and kill animals and stuff like that. But the Bible tells a slightly different story. Then it also says that this was built by somebody who had remarkable engineering skills. Now, to me, it's anecdotal, but it's just a little clue that if Noah, who was the architect besides God of the ark and built it all, this gigantically massive boat. I mean, that would be the equivalent of, maybe like two guys or four guys building the Titanic, by themselves. Like it would take, 10 guys, probably like 300 years to build the Titanic the way that it was built. Now, again, it's a little bit different because Noah was 600 at the time that he left, on the whole, flood journey. So he had his whole life to build that ark, which, he had hundreds of years to do it. Obviously we believe as Christians that he did, but other people might not believe that. But if you believe the other thing that's hard to believe, that he's hundreds of years old and that he spent his whole life building this, then, you might find it more easy to believe. Specifically, there's somebody with remarkable engineering skills. Well, at this time, they weren't even, apparently doing agricultural things like farming and working with crops and gardens and things like that. So how could you expect people who are so simple that they work with stones and handmade tools and they hunt and they do these very primitive things to have architectural engineering skills at this level to be able to build whatever this structure was if they weren't even doing these other things that are much more, much less complicated. So it tells us that it's possible that the scientists have it a little wrong because they're missing information. But I look at that and say, who at that time had remarkable engineering skills? Who was in that area and possibly around the same time? Because we really don't know exactly what year Noah lived and did all this stuff. The Bible doesn't say that. But when I think about the country of Turkey, and I think about 10,000 years ago, and I think about a man who had remarkable engineering skills, I think of Noah. And so, it's possible that Noah, or at least his family members, had some involvement in the building of whatever this was in Göbekli Tepe. So then you have only about 10% of the site has been excavated as of 2025. So as of just last year, only 10% of it has been excavated. How they, determine that, I guess it might have to do with, like, heat maps and lasers, sonar pulse, things that read the ground and allow you to see underneath. Um, the they've only discovered 10%, which means there's 90% that still has to be uncovered, which will probably tell more to this story and maybe validate or confirm some of the stuff that I say here today, which again I could be totally wrong. Physical surveys, so that's what I was just talking about, suggest many more enclosures remain buried. The structures were deliberately filled around 8000 BC, preserving them exceptionally well. So not only did the architect build whatever this was, they also buried it and then preserved it in a way where it would stand the test of time. Why would somebody do that? How would they know how to do it? And why would they do it? For what purpose other than to make sure future generations discover that message and understand it so that they could carry on the story or whatever the message or whatever is trying to be told here? And if you look at the difference in time, they're saying this was about between 9500 and 8000 BC. Well, that's 150 years. And we'll go into that a little bit more later on. But what was it? 9500? I think it was 95. Yes, that's 500 years. Noah was 950 years old when he died. So, again, it's possible that, you know, he could have built this thing, or his family could have built it and then buried it and then moved on to wherever they went or died and whatever life went on. But just a little bit anecdotal, but it is interesting. um so 1963 surveys, first noted in a 1963 survey but misinterpreted as a graveyard. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt recognized its significance in 1994 and led excavations until his death in 2014. Work continues under Turkish archaeologists with the German archaeological. So recent discoveries in 2023 and 2025 include domestic buildings, water management features, a painted boar statue with red, white, and black pigments, life-size human statues, and evidence of permanent settlements rather than just a ceremonial site. So it wasn't just a site that people were, you know, put up for some one-time event and then left. It looks like this was a residence where people were staying here and living here and did purpose and significance interpreted as a ritual or ceremonial center, possibly for funerary rites or worship, astronomical observations. Animal bones indicate feasting and sacrifices. But remember, for what we're going to talk about in a few moments, Some see it as evidence of complex social organization driving the Neolithic transition to farming. Alternative theories, and they always do because this is what scientists go to when they don't have an answer, recording a comet impact, whatever else. So the stone carvings. The most striking feature is the intricate reliefs on many T-shaped pillars, mostly low relief, some high or 3D. The pillars themselves are anthropomorphic. The T-top represents a head. Shafts show arms, hands, and sometimes belts, loincloth, suggesting stylized human or deity figures. Most common are images of animals, snakes, foxes, boars, you know, vultures, scorpions, lions, bulls, gazelles, cranes, spiders, you know, felids, which they are saying might be leopards, and then other images on there. So this is what some of them look like, and some of them, like they said, are 3D because they carved the animal into the stone, which means they chiseled away all the rest to make it reveal. That's kind of like how sculptors do it, and then some of them were just imprinted on the surface of the stone, but a lot of them are pictures of animals and things like that. So that's pretty much the idea of what that, was. But now I want to take a look at, the Noah flood story in the Bible, the tail end of it, of when things ended and what happened after the fact. 'Cause I don't think a lot of people have read, like, we know these, bits and pieces of the Bible because most people don't read the Bible the way that people used to. Especially, Christians today are not like the Christians of the past. I mean, you can compare, your best Christians today who have the mega churches, constantly, worshiping and doing all these things. I don't really think they hold a candle to the way that the Puritans were in the early 1600s when they first came and founded America. Put this, whole pre-colonial country together. Those people really were dedicated, loyal Christians. And so now we're taking a look at the aftermath of the flood and what happened next. So it says, but this is Genesis 8. If you're looking to follow along in your own Bible, Genesis 8. This is the New Living Translation, which is a lot more, made easier to read today for people. I typically don't read this version, but sometimes it's a little bit easier to read for these type of things and just to get the message across really clearly. So you can, read the same exact thing pretty much in the version that you have at home, but this is Genesis 8. The flood recedes is what it's titled. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock with him in the boat. He sent a wind to blow across the earth, and the floodwaters began to recede. The underground waters stopped flowing, and the torrential rains from the sky were stopped. So the floodwaters gradually receded from the earth after about 150 days, so about 5 months, exactly 5 months from the time the flood began. The boat came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. So that, as we have come to understand from, I've talked about this in the previous episode about Noah's Ark a few episodes back, and the discovery that they believe they found Noah's Ark on the top of Mount Ararat in Turkey, and that the archaeologists are beginning to, I think, excavate it now as of 2025, I think, to find out if it actually is Noah's Ark or the remnants of that. But that is apparently resting right now on Mount Ararat in Turkey. This literally says in the Bible, which is written thousands of years, before they discovered this in Turkey, that Noah's Ark came to a rest on the mountain of Ararat. Already you have an actual archaeological find that archaeologists are saying this looks like a boat-shaped object that, seems similar, which we've talked about in the previous episode, of it, the dimensions, how big, how long, how tall, how many decks, through all the scans and stuff of the ground. Um, it lines up with what is in Genesis that you can read in, previous chapters of Genesis, talking about the details of the boat and the measurements and everything that God gave to Noah. So archaeologists, probably not even Christians, are saying this matches up to what is in the story in Genesis talking about Noah's Ark. Well, here you have it also says it landed on Mount Ararat. Okay, so you have something in the Bible and something in real life that correlates. 2.5 months later, as the waters continued to go down, other mountain peaks became visible. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he released the dove or the raven. We're not really sure which, but a bird went out. It got found out the land was dry. Came back with an olive leaf in its beak to let Noah know that they were getting close to getting the land dry. Because it was able to now find plants again. And then a few more days went by, a couple more months. Basically, it took like 12.5 months, a year, and half a month for all the earth to dry out from the rain that had been raining, for the 40 days and 40 nights, and then the water sitting there on the earth, keeping the flood there, slowly receding back, to where it had to go. Basically took about a full year for this whole thing to take place. So imagine Noah, his family, all the animals are on the boat. They're at the top of this mountain in Turkey, which is Turkey now, modern day Turkey, and they're sitting there in the boat, doing what they can to survive, waiting for all the water to recede. And as it's receding, everything that's on Earth is pretty much dead anyway. So now they have to go and find whatever remnants are left that are habitable for, living or for eating or growing land that's actually also too like the land, the soil has to be fertile to grow. And it's been soaking for a year. That's not really like too much watering also kills plants. So these two locations are not right next to each other, but it's possible that this was the next habitable, environment for them to go and lay new ground and build a life. And I'll show you that in a little bit. But essentially, taking it from here, Noah was 601 years old on the first day of the new year. 10.5 months after that, the flood began. The flood was all right. So I basically just summarized all that. Took about a full year. Then God said to Noah, "Leave the boat, all of you, you and your wife, and your sons and their wives." So those are the humans that came on the boat and survived and created the new civilization that, we are all today. He said, "Release all the animals, the birds, livestock, and all of these small animals that scurry along the ground so they can be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth." So Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives left the boat, and all the large and small animals, birds came out of the boat pair by pair. So the next part's very crucial to connect to what we were talking about before. But if you don't know the full story of Noah's Ark, I suggest you read it because it's actually quite interesting. But, God told Noah, yes, to bring two of every animal on the ark. And he specifically said for each one to be a male and a female in each pair group to be able to procreate and make the next generation of animals. So this was not only a start over, a do over of, human beings, it was a do over of all life on, and God basically killed off every single creature on the earth except for the fish, the animals that lived in the sea. He wiped them all out and made them restart again, all from one genetic line each. So every deer that's out there comes from two deer that were on Noah's Ark. Every, elephant, dog, horse, they all come from two animals that were on Noah's Ark, if we're believing the words in the Bible. And even humans, we all go back to Noah and his family and the wives and the sons of Noah and his wife, and so that's all detailed in the next part of Genesis, where the families were split up between his three sons and their families, and how they basically made all the civilizations of the world, which actually lines up historically to what we know and look at as the global empires in the world from the east to the west. And, they even call them the same things that the scientists and historians confirm and have agreed this is what everything is, and this is what it's called, and this is where it was located. Well, that's all found here in Genesis also. So the Bible actually correlates to real life and vice versa. But the next part's very specific. It says, and we don't know the time between when he left the boat and when he did this. We just know it's the next sentence. So don't think that he left the boat and this is exactly what he did right next to the boat. They could have went and found, an area to go start a new life, and that could have taken them a week, or a month or a year. It doesn't say he immediately did it. It just says he did this next. So it says, then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and there he sacrificed as burnt offerings the animals and birds that had been approved for this purpose. So that's what I was saying before. God said two of every animal onto the ark. He also told him to bring seven pairs of every animal for whatever specific animals he was telling him for food, for resources, and to have as offerings to the Lord for sacrifices when this was all said and done. Because at that time we didn't have Jesus, so people used to actually have to sacrifice animals for to God for multiple things, mostly sin. For things like this as well as a thank you to the Lord for sparing their lives. And so, it goes back before Jesus, so we don't really quite understand it. It seems weird, but when you take the whole thing into context, you can understand before Christ we had to do that because we had no sacrifice. Christ became that ultimate sacrifice for all of us, so we no longer have to do these things. But he built an altar for the Lord, and he sacrificed animals at the altar. Well, we just read at the Gobekli Tepe site there were these structures that were built really architecturally, engineering, wise, skill wise, very well. You needed somebody who had that type of engineering skill set to be able to build that temple. At least that's what the historians are saying. And then on top of that, they had pictures and drawings and stuff of animals carved into the stone, and it was an altar that they said somebody made for their god. And then they found, I guess, bones or whatever, some sort of leftover remains of animals that were apparently burnt at this altar, which makes them believe it's an altar where people were sacrificing animals. And this was a permanent residence, that people weren't just doing this for an event and then leaving. So it sounds to me now, when you put all this into context, again, it's just a theory and it's not a conspiracy. It's just a theory. It's possible that Noah and his family left that area, searched for the next area that was a place where they could go set up camp and live and build a life, and had a fertile ground to be able to plant, had an area, that was livable for the animals that they were going to raise so that they had food and all these things. And it's possible that they found this area where the site of Göbekli Tepe is today as their new home, and, you know, built the altar as an altar to God for, thanking them for sparing their lives and letting them start the next generation of mankind. And then it literally says what he did here. He sacrificed the animals and offered them as burnt offerings to God at this altar that he built. So my best guess is that Noah and his family built this altar, and this was where it came from. This, is another part of the story of the flood. And then all the stone tablets have animal stuff on them. Well, that makes perfect sense because it's probably part of the altar, which was depicting the stuff that they had with them on this journey. And only 10% of it has been excavated, so we don't know what the other 90% has. Maybe the other 90% has images, carvings of the boat and the story of the flood and all that stuff. We don't know. But what's interesting is it had animals. And, yes, people used to worship animals back then and sacrifice them to their gods. But it's also possible that Noah was trying to tell the story of Noah's Ark, and he did it with the stone tablets depicting pictures of the animals and the flood and the journey and the story and everything. And then it says that these people buried it and preserved it in a way where it would, stand the test of time. Why would you do that? If this was no longer important to you, or if it just fell over time, it collapsed and crumbled, it wouldn't have been labeled as intentionally preserved. But if it was, let's say another culture came in and took it over and they pillaged the area and everything, they also wouldn't have preserved it. Whoever did this intentionally preserved it, which tells me as a skeptic or whatever that it's possible that he built this altar, did these things, and then preserved it so that the people in the future would find the story of the flood and that message would continue. Because also you have to remember, this is pre-writing times. There was no Bible back then. There was no writing back then. They didn't even have writing until much thousands of years later, which was started apparently, as far as we know, by the Sumerian culture with cuneiform, which was the early images of writing, like drawings of animals on cave walls and stuff. and then eventually got to hieroglyphics by the Egyptians, and that eventually led into alphabetical by the Greeks, and now where we get to, the written language today. But that all came from those cultures, 3, 4-ish thousand years ago BC, before Christ. So really like 6,000 plus years ago today. This is saying 9,000, 8,000 years BC, which is, going to be what, 5, 6,000 years before writing was even established. So if Noah had to pass this message on about the flood, and he had no way of doing it yet because writing had never been invented, and he already invented, not him, but God through him invented something already new, which was the boat. The ark was the first boat, apparently. And at that time, no one had use for boats because nothing like this had ever happened before. It was a brand new thing. And God did it once and said he would never do it again. That was the whole sign with the rainbow. But, this is the story, possibly, of Noah telling the story of Noah's Ark, the flood, and all that stuff, putting it in the first form of writing ever, which was the sculptures that he made for this altar, and then burying it so that mankind would find it later on and know the story of the flood. Because also, if you realize there were ancient cultures that everybody had a story, a flood story. I think the Egyptians, the Amorites, the Hittites, all these different cultures had a flood story, but it was orally told. It was told just from having conversations with each other and passing that story down orally throughout the generations. Well, two things. How would they each have a flood story if everybody was, killed, like, if they didn't all come from one family, how would they have a flood story? How would they each have a flood story? Because it says in Genesis going forward after this, Noah and his sons all split up. Now, I think Noah stayed, but his sons all split up and went off to build their own families and repopulate the earth, but they all separated. So Noah's family all separated, spread throughout the earth, and created all the different cultures, different civilizations that would eventually become the different empires that made the world what it is today. And, if they didn't all come from one family that survived and was on that boat and came off the boat, how would they all have a flood story to be able to tell? So it makes sense that this is lining up archaeologically, historically, and lining up with the biblical of that the families came off the boat. They possibly went to this area, Gobekli Tepe that we call today, built the altar, did the sacrifice, lived there. Noah and his wife probably died there. And then they separated and went off to the world and all told these flood stories orally without any form of writing. So they had to keep passing it down by telling until eventually it came into written form and made it into the Bible and things like this. Historians will tell you every culture has a flood story. That's why Noah's Ark can't be true. It's just another fable. They all tell it. But what they're missing is it's probably that they all came from the same group of people that just split up. And they're telling the same story because they all came from the original family that was on that boat. That's my point. That's what I'm getting at. But yeah, it's interesting, and I just want to finish up by showing you just where each thing is located so that we can get an idea to see what that journey might have actually looked like. So this is the actual map for each event, location, and distance to each other. So the one over here in the far right is Mount Ararat, where allegedly Noah's Ark landed on the mountain, and this is where Gobekli Tepe is located, apparently. So if you look, you see it's actually a pretty straightforward trail from one to the other. Obviously, going through mountains and stuff and working their way there. But it's not like it's way out of, the realm of possibility. And then also, if you look at it in context, it's a 6.5 to 7 day walk from Mount Ararat to this area. Now it's possible. You'd think, why would you have to walk 7 days to, go somewhere? That might have been the only place to actually that was actually able to be habitated at that time after the flood. Who knows what the conditions of everything was like? It's possible that this was the first place that they found that they thought we could actually live here long term. Or maybe they stopped at a few locations along the way and just felt we couldn't live here long term, but maybe landed here. But it's only a 6 day walk, 6 to 7 day walk from this area, which is not a long time. But then on top of that, you have all these animals coming out of the ark with you, which probably included some animals that humans at the time typically rode on, because again, this is pre all types of vehicles besides boats. You know, it's possible they had horses and donkeys and other things that they even rode on them to get to this destination even faster. So it might have only taken 4.5 days, 5 days, who knows, right? And at that time, this was very common for people to do this, to walk and travel and explore and settle in areas. People were doing this all the way up until the the 1600s in America, when they would get on a wagon with horses and travel throughout the country until they found land that they thought was a good environment to live, and they would settle down. And this is thousands and thousands of years after this event. So if people were doing it just a few hundred years ago, it's possible that this is what happened. So that's pretty much my theory in a nutshell. Obviously, there's probably a lot more that goes into that I'm not touching on right now, but it's the theory of, you know, possible this is all tied together. It's possible that Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. The remains are there now. They're going to be excavated over the next few years and probably confirm this is the actual Ark or the remnants of the Ark. And then it's possible that Noah and his family went over to this location where Mount Ararat, Gobekli Tepe is, and possibly built that altar to sacrifice the animals to God and you know, encapsulate the message of the story of the flood for future generations to find and read about and understand that this is what happened and this is the oldest, documentation we have that predates all the other flood stories throughout history, which would, prove that the the biblical one in Genesis is the truest one, the oldest one, and the one that actually happened. But it's just a theory, it's just a working theory. Like I said, don't get, hung up on it and now go and run with it as though it's fact, because it's not. It's just a theory that it's possible this is the case. And since they've only partially excavated both sites and they're doing them around the same time, it's possible that they end up over the next few years as they finish excavating them connecting the dots and tying them together. And we might actually see that these two are related in some way, if not in this complete way that I theorized here now. But that's pretty much it. That's my theory for that. I just thought it was an interesting take, and I thought it was something different that maybe I don't really see anybody on the internet talking about this. So hopefully we're bringing you something unique and different to think about, and be different from the other channels out there. So we're not another copycat channel. Maybe some other people have come up with this theory, I'm sure. I'm not the only one. Plus, it said there's no original thought, anymore. Everything's already been thought of and done. So it's probable that somebody else has already thought of this too. But yeah, that's pretty much the idea of my theory on this. Let me know what you think. Put it in the comments if you agree, if you disagree, if you have another theory for both of these locations or one of these locations or whatever. Put it in the comments. Let me know. I definitely want to bounce these ideas off with you guys and get to hear what you have to say and would love the feedback. Plus, if other people have theories about this online and I'm not aware of that information, feel free to share their podcast or, whatever it is they're talking about, this subject in the comments. If it's something that I look at and think that it's clean and it's good and there's no harm in it, I'll leave it up there for other people to see it too, just so that it's the opportunity to hear other sides of this and not just be isolated to what I have to say. But that's pretty much it for this episode. Like I always say, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share all that good stuff. Don't forget to check out the book that I presented earlier in this episode, the children's book. Don't forget to check out our Amazon storefront and our Healthy Body Good Soul apparel shop. And these are all ways that you can support the channel and help us continue to grow. So with that said, Happy New Year. And that's it for this video. Stay tuned for the next one. All right, everybody, I just want to take a moment to promote my children's book. This is Little Boy Full of Love. That's me on the back. And this is a little sneak peek on the inside. It's a great book. It's a children's book. I actually wrote this for my son, and it's available right now on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, bookshop.org, and a lot of other online platforms. But more importantly to me, it's actually available in a lot of bookstores throughout the country. You can find out which ones are closest to you on my Instagram page. You know, we highly recommend that you shop local, buy from a local bookstore. So if you are looking to, you know, get a children's book for you or anybody you know, or even with the holidays coming up, it's a great time to, you know, buy a children's book as a gift. You know, definitely get it from a bookstore that's local to you. But if you absolutely can't get it from one of the bookstores that are currently carrying it right now, and we're in about 15 or 16 different states across the country, so it may actually be in your state, and it could even be local to you. But if you can't get it from the physical bookstore, check out our Amazon storefront. The book's available on there right now. And like I said, with the holidays coming up, you may want to do your Christmas or Hanukkah or holiday shopping early, and you can even order it from our Amazon storefront and ship it directly to whoever you're gifting it to. But it's available on those platforms, Amazon storefront and bookstores and other websites that I mentioned. But I want to take a moment here to look at the storefront just to give you an idea of some other stuff that we have available on there. These are products that we highly recommend. They are things that we use in our daily lives, and it's all organized by category. So it's a lot easier to, you know, shop for the holidays and specifically for things that interest you, particular categories. Available right now, many different items on our storefront. If you can see here, 61 items just in women's apparel, fall decor, because right now we're in fall, 26 items, kitchen items, you know, baking specifically, things for around the house, children's toys, even stuff for parties. If you're trying to save money on a party and throwing your own, you know, occasion, you can even buy some cool gadgets here to help you, you know, put on a better party. You know, health and wellness items here, even stuff for Christmas. And there's the book right there. So you can get it from the storefront. You can get it from the bookstores, like I mentioned. But it's available on all these different platforms. It's really easy to find and gift to somebody. Also, I want to show you the apparel shop, and these are some clothing items that we actually produced. So if you're looking to get some cool apparel items, you know, shirts, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, leggings, even accessories, cell phone cases, women's makeup bags, fanny packs, coffee mugs, all different types of stuff, even some, you know, art, all different categories here, apparel, homeware, accessories, drinks, even digital items. It's all on this store, healthybodygoodssoul.com. Anything that pertains to you or somebody that you're looking to get a gift for the holidays. A lot of great designs on here, a lot of cool designs that we actually custom created. Stainless steel water bottles, especially now with the fall and winter. A lot of cool hoodies and long sleeve shirts. This is a really cool one, I think, for women. The original Be Your Soul apparel, that one's actually really popular. People tend to like that. This one's one of my favorites. The free shirt. It's the American flag, and it says free, and that says not property of the United States government. That one's pretty cool. Got all different types of tank tops, hoodies, long sleeve, short sleeve, tote bags, coffee mugs, even some items for kids, backpacks. So if you're the type that likes to, you know, plan ahead, I would definitely recommend ordering from the Amazon storefront or the apparel shop within the next couple of weeks to get everything in time for the holidays. Use code SAVE15 on the apparel shop to save 15% off everything on the storefront. So order within the next week or two, and you'll definitely have everything in time for the holidays. Definitely check out all the links to everything, the Amazon storefront, the book, and the apparel shop in my bio on all my platforms: Rumble, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, But you can also find them in all the show notes for every episode that I post, and get all your orders in time for the holidays. All right, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It helps the channel continue to grow. And put in the comments things that you would like me to talk about and make videos on for the future, and I will definitely do my best to do that. Stay tuned for the next one.